Every country in the world possesses its own unique set of laws and methods of punishment. Consequently, it is entirely natural for the laws and regulations of one nation to appear strange to the inhabitants of another. However, there exists a country whose legal codes and penal sanctions are capable of leaving citizens of any other nation utterly astounded. I trust you have already realized which country's laws I am referring to here. Saudi Arabia is the nation globally renowned for having some of the most stringent laws. Public flogging. Saudi Arabia's legal system is founded upon interpretations of Islamic law. One form of punishment within this legal framework is public flogging. This constitutes a type of corporal punishment wherein a convicted individual is struck a specific number of times using a cane or whip. The courts determine the exact number of lashes to be administered. If the offense is minor in nature, the individual may be sentenced to between 10 and 15 lashes. However, in cases involving serious crimes, the court may order anywhere from 100 to over 1,000 lashes. Offenders are sentenced to public flogging for a variety of transgressions, including the consumption of alcohol, gambling, harassing women in public, engaging in disorderly conduct, or even voicing criticism deemed contrary to Islamic principles. In 2012, a Saudi citizen named Raif bin Mohammed Badawi was arrested. Badawi was a blogger who operated a website titled Free Saudi Liberals. On this platform, he published an article that was perceived as mocking the Islamic faith. For this offense, in 2013, a court found him guilty and sentenced him to 600 lashes to be administered in public. In 2014, his sentence was increased to 1,000 lashes, 10 years of imprisonment, and a fine of 1 million Saudi riyals. Rather than ordering the full 1,000 lashes to be inflicted on a single day, the court ordered that Badawi receive 50 lashes per week over a period of 20 weeks. Another notable case involved a Filipino man who brought 2 alcohol-filled chocolate bars into Saudi Arabia. For this transgression, he was sentenced to 75 lashes. However, beyond Saudi Arabia, the punishment of flogging is observed in many Muslim-majority countries, such as Indonesia, Iran, Singapore, and the Maldives. This punishment is typically administered in public, in the presence of a judge, using a thin cane. The strokes are delivered in such a manner as to ensure that no permanent scars or physical injuries are inflicted upon the offender's body. Fundamentally, the primary objective of this punishment is not to physically injure the offender, but rather to publicly humiliate them and serve as a deterrent warning to others. However, the specific method of flogging varies depending on the offender's gender. In the case of men, the punishment is administered while they are standing, striking their bare backs. For women, however, the punishment is typically carried out while they are seated and fully clothed. Nevertheless, in 2020, the Supreme Court of Saudi Arabia abolished the punishment of flogging. Consequently, judges may now impose alternative penalties such as fines or imprisonment. Amputation. In most countries, the crime of theft is typically punished with a term of imprisonment. However, Saudi Arabia's legal system is founded upon Islamic law. Therefore, a particularly severe punishment has been prescribed for those convicted of theft, specifically the amputation of limbs. If an individual is arrested on charges of theft, a case is first filed against them in court. However, not every instance of theft results in this punishment. The stolen items must possess a specific minimum monetary value. Furthermore, if an individual steals food solely to alleviate their own hunger or that of their family members, they are exempted from this punishment. If, based on clear and irrefutable evidence, an individual is formally declared guilty, they are then taken to a public venue. Subsequently, their right hand is amputated at the wrist. Medical personnel are present alongside the offender to ensure that the procedure is carried out safely and to monitor the offender's condition, thereby ensuring that they experience the least amount of pain possible. Should the offender commit theft again following this punishment, their left foot is then amputated. However, if the crime involves armed robbery, specifically stopping passers-by on the street to rob them, the punishment is rendered even more severe. In such cases, both the offender's hand and foot are amputated simultaneously. Stoning. Among the various penalties employed within the Saudi Arabian legal system, the punishment of stoning, death by throwing stones, remains the most controversial and arguably the most severe form of punishment. Under this form of punishment, the offender is pelted with stones until death ensues. This severe penalty is imposed upon any married individual found guilty of adultery. In this execution method, the offender is buried alive, partially submerged in the ground, to prevent any possibility of escape. Subsequently, a pile of stones is gathered before them. The stones are deliberately kept small in size. This ensures that the offender endures prolonged physical agony, and the execution process itself is thereby protracted over an extended period. However, a stringent prerequisite governs the imposition of this punishment. It may be carried out only if a specific condition is met. To establish the offender's guilt, there must be a minimum of 4 adult witnesses who have clearly observed the act, or the accused individual must voluntarily confess to the offense. Furthermore, authorities examine whether the offender engaged in the act voluntarily and without any coercion. However, such punishments are extremely rare. Between 1981 and 1992, the punishment of death by stoning was recorded on 4 separate occasions. It was last witnessed in 2015. Under pressure from international human rights groups, Saudi Arabia currently imposes prison sentences instead of death by stoning. Nevertheless, there remain certain Muslim-majority countries where adultery, prostitution, and blasphemy are still punishable by death through stoning. Iran is prominent among these nations, exhibiting a particularly high rate of executions carried out via stoning. Between 1980 and 2009, 150 individuals in Iran were sentenced to death by stoning. Since the Islamic Revolution of 1979, Iran's penal code has explicitly stipulated that the stones used for execution must not be so large that a mere 1 or 2 throws would instantly kill the victim. Conversely, they must not be so small that they cannot reasonably be classified as stones. Numerous instances of execution by stoning have also been recorded in Afghanistan under Taliban rule. In 2015, one such high-profile case went viral. A 20-year-old woman named Ruxana was married off by her family against her will. She subsequently eloped with another unmarried man. Upon her capture, she was sentenced to death by stoning for the crime of adultery. Decapitation. 2023 marked the bloodiest year in Saudi Arabia's history. During that year, a total of 172 individuals were sentenced to death in the kingdom. The majority of these 172 convicts were executed by means of decapitation, while the remainder were executed by firing squad. Under this method of capital punishment, the condemned prisoner is transported to a public venue, typically a large, open field where crowds of spectators gather to witness the event. An executioner then blindfolds the prisoner and, with a single stroke of a long, razor-sharp sword, severs the head from the body. The scene is so gruesome that the mere sight of it causes spectators' heartbeats to race with fear. Indeed, many even faint. In the case of convicted rapists, their bodies are hoisted and displayed publicly along the roadside using a large crane following their execution. The bodies of terrorists and bandits, on the other hand, are bound to a post resembling a cross and left hanging by the roadside. The sole objective behind administering such punishments in public spaces in Saudi Arabia is to ensure that spectators, even inadvertently, never dare to commit similar crimes in the future. When a criminal is found guilty of drug trafficking, rape, murder, treason, terrorist activities, illegal arms possession, or robbery, they are publicly executed by beheading. However, if a criminal is implicated in terrorist activities, particularly in high-profile cases, they are executed by a firing squad at close range. Notably, there is no need to wait for years for the death penalty to be carried out here. Once the sentence is pronounced, the convict is executed within that very same year. If an accused individual is proven guilty, they are incarcerated in Al-Ha'ir prison. However, they are not held in solitary confinement there. Instead, they are detained alongside the general prison population. Moreover, the conditions within this prison are extremely inhumane. Criminals are subjected to various forms of torture within the facility, designed to inflict both physical and psychological suffering. They are not even permitted to meet with their families. That brings us to the end of today's episode. For now, I bid you farewell. We shall meet again in the next episode.